It is so good to have you both here. Welcome, Robert Battle from the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater and Donald Byrd from Spectrum Dance Theater here in Seattle. I think this is probably the first time for me in about 20 years that I didn't get to see the Alvin Ailey Dance Company here in Seattle since, of course, the Seattle Theater Group has been the presenter of records. So that's been like about 20 years now. And every other April, you all would be here in Seattle. It's particularly sad because April 18th would have been the premiere of Donald Byrd's piece here in Seattle called Greenwood. So if we had not been interrupted and everything been put on pause, we'd be having this conversation live in the theater. But we figured that it would be just as good to do it this way. And Donald, thank you so much for suggesting that we do this conversation anyway and for inviting me to talk with you all. So I want to start by talking about a little bit about the relationship between Donald Byrd and the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. How far back does that go, Donald?
Well, my relationship with the Ailey organization goes back to 1973 or
wow.
something. It goes back to when the organization and the school was located on 59th Street between 2nd and 3rd in Manhattan. And I was a student there, a scholarship student there. And so that's where that part began. I mean, I think everything began there. I think that's one way of saying it. Everything began in 59th.
In the 70s.
In the 70s, early 70s.
That's awesome. And Robert, you have been artistic director for, Donald said to me, 10 years now. Has it been that long?
Yeah.
Wow.
It really has.
Wow. So it was then almost 11 years ago when you first came to Seattle with Judith Jameson, and Donald hosted a little gathering to welcome you here, which is when I met you. It just doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
Yeah.
So,
right about now, it feels that long ago.
Now you feel like an old hand at this, right?
Right.
So I'm curious about how this commission, I know, Donald, this is your 5th commission for the Ailey Company, and I'm curious about how this one came about, because what I think we've been witnessing, Robert, under your direction is more of a move towards issues around social justice. I looked up an early description of the Ailey Company, and it says something like inspires all in a universal celebration of the human spirit using the African American cultural experience and the modern dance tradition. Nothing about that says social justice to me, but with the commissioning, particularly of Greenwood, and then also Jamar Roberts' Ode, these are issues of the day. So talk about how you connected with Donald to commission this particular piece.
Well, I've always admired Donald Byrd as an artist, as a choreographer, and always knew that his work was profound, that it was layered, and so I knew it was going to happen. I just didn't know when. Sometimes it's, like I just sort of feel my way through. And so we started talking. Oh, I remember when I decided, sorry if you hear a noise, it's scratching, it's my dog. It's just, all hands on deck.
Yeah.
When we got together, I think it was when I was in Seattle. It was right after, was it after EJ and Calvin passed, or the next time?
Well, I mean, we certainly got together when they passed, when you were here. There was a...
Yeah. So
and,
I started thinking about this for a while. And the only thing I did was commission Donald Byrd, and he came up with the subject matter. And he told me that he was working in that vein, particularly at the time that I spoke to him, looking at social justice. um, politics, all of the things that are important right now. And so my bend toward works that are about social justice is because I grew up in a household like that, where my mother had a group called the Afro-Americans, and they did poetry and song about the Black experience. And I was hearing all of this poetry and these spirituals and about the movement. So it's kind of a natural place for me to be in and to feel comfortable in. But I also knew it was important for the company at this time to really stick our necks out and be a part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should also backtrack just a little bit and say that Seattle has a pretty unique relationship with the Ailey company. You mentioned Calvin, and Tacoma's beloved Calvin Hunt was general manager for Ailey for a number of years, and I think it was 2013 he passed, and it was right before you all were about to arrive here in Seattle. And fortunately, the Seattle Theater Group has since developed the Ailey Camp here in Seattle area that has been dedicated to the memory of Calvin Hunt. So we have a pretty long-standing and deep relationship. Donald, I know that you have been interested in post-Reconstruction United States, you know, kind of the state of things for a very long time, and have dealt with issues around Jim Crow, the whole minstrel show revisited, and then this last couple of seasons here in Seattle, you've been dealing with issues of race and coming up on this season, working with race and climate change. So I understand that you didn't learn about Greenwood until what, about 7 years ago, is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was something like that. We were in, Spectrum was in Tulsa doing a performance. We were doing Theater Needless Talents, which is a piece about Jewish artists in concentration and death camps during the Second World War. And the presenter there said to me, "Would you like to go to Greenwood? Would you like to go see Greenwood?" And I said, I didn't know what Greenwood was, and you know, he thought it was important, and so I said, okay, you know. So we went, and I saw what was there, what's there now, or what was there 7 years ago, and it was a combination of people living there, going about their lives, and then there were some areas that were like abandoned, like remnants of buildings that had once stood there with staircases, steps that would go up to the front porch of the house, just kind of going nowhere, maybe a chimney. And and I didn't know what that signified, what that was about. And so, but then we also went to, there's the community center there, which had on the walls a kind of history of Greenwood that had some photographs of what it looked like before and what it looked like after the massacre. It still did not, I didn't get it because even though I read the text that was there, it was not clear to me until much later, even though that was the moment when it was kind of introduced to me. And so later, like right after, around the time that I was doing Strange Fruit here, and I think Robert and I had already talked about my doing something for Ailey, and so I said, well, let me go back and look at this thing about Greenwood, because because it seemed like it might that might be a theme or something that I could work with, and that's how, that's what happened.
So I think it's really interesting that this piece was in development in 2019, right? Or maybe some before, but premiered December 2019. And it was the fall of 2019 when Watchmen came onto the scene, which opens with this scene of the Greenwood massacre. And May 2021 will be the centennial of that particular event. So all of this happens to be quite fortuitous in its timing. Would you talk, Donald, a bit about the content of the piece and what it really is about for people who have not heard about Greenwood and may not know? Talk about that.
So the Greenwood massacre was an attack by the white residents of Tulsa on the Black African American community of Greenwood, which was a very prosperous community. It was considered probably the most prosperous and the richest Black community in the United States around at that time. And on this particular day, a young Black man stepped into an elevator with a white female elevator operator. This is what we know. She screamed and he ran away. And then there were various stories about what happened that were not verified in any way. And then what followed was the white community, white people, a mob of white people closing in on on Greenwood. The residents of Greenwood defended themselves. And I think that part is really important, that they weren't just kind of victims, that they were defending themselves. They were victimized, but they weren't victims. And they defended themselves, that ended up with a huge number of people known to have been killed and others that just kind of disappeared and you don't know what happened to them. So the piece I think maybe the central thing to know about it is it looks at what happened in the elevator. So it looks at what and what it does is it says, this is what we know what happens. There's one version of the elevator. It's just the simple facts. He goes into the elevator and she screams. One of the story narratives about it was that she kind of said something about it later, I believe, was that he stepped on a foot and she screamed. There's another narrative that they were actually in a relationship, and while they were, refamiliarizing themselves in the elevator, he stepped on her foot and she screamed. And then there was the other one, which is the kind of what the white people believe is that he stepped into the elevator, he attacked her, and during the attack she screamed. So that's kind of the center, the kind of the incident. I mean, these various interpretations of what happened in the elevator, and then we look at. There's another part of it that's about what we could call white envy, because the community was really prosperous, and the people in the white community, and this is during the Jim Crow era, they were not happy about seeing Black people prosper. And so some of it was that the massacre may have been, what the impulse behind it was not the so-called attack, but really was a way to kind of put Black people back in their place. Right. And so the piece kind of looks at that not as individuals, but what I call the piece Black psyche. Some people call it, white psyche, a kind of attacks this kind of animosity, this animus that is there. And then the other part of it is the impact of that attack on the members of that community. And so that's in the piece is done as a quartet of people that are like a family, and so that the family is kind of the symbol for the community. And then what we witness is the persistent and violent attack on this family and the disruption of their that unity that they represent.
Yeah, I just for people who may not know this, as Greenwood, I think it may be much more widely responded to as Black Wall Street, which is what I understand Booker T. Washington coined it as, Black Wall Street. The other thing that I just want you to talk a little bit about too, Donald, because I'm anticipating we're going to eventually see this piece in Seattle.
You will.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. But the ways in which you have carried through, particularly the female matriarch family member, and how that has carried through in a couple of your pieces, and I'm anticipating that it will continue to carry through. And where that, where did that develop, and what was your guide for that?
Right. So I think you're talking about what I've called the witness sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that is a character that originally I was thinking about August Wilson's plays, and there's a character that kind of runs through some of his plays called Aunt Esther.
Yeah.
And Esther in his plays is said to be a woman. She's like, I'm 150 years old, but you kind of get the feeling that she's really older than that.
Yeah.
That's what she says, and that she carries the memory of things. And I think in the Wilson plays, she carries the memory of Pittsburgh in some ways, you know. And so I think that was a really important part of trying to develop when thinking about this character. And she first appeared in my work in Strange Fruit, which premiered almost a year, or maybe a little bit more than a year, than Greenwood did in New York. And so, but also there's this aspect of her which is developing now, is that she's a little bit like a character. There's a character in a group of characters in the Octavia Butler novels.
Parable of the Talents and Parable of the Sower.
Yeah.
Right.
That move through time, and that what they do. One group, this one woman that is a part of, they are a group that want to help mankind as opposed to the other group that wants to enslave them. Mm-hmm. And so this character is in some ways a composite. She is a composite of both those characters.
Okay. Got it. And just one note too, are the costumes by a Seattleite?
Yes, the costumes are by Doris Black.
Yay!
Who also designed Strange Fruit. And there are a couple of people that were on the Spectrum design team that was also a part of it. And the other one is Rob Whitmer, who designed the sound. And the sound is really a big part of Greenwood.
And we have a clip that I'm hopeful we're able to share with folks as part of this interview, so they can see a little bit more of what you're talking about. Robert, Donald is someone who is a disruptor. I think he self-describes as that way, and also you'd have described him as that way. What is this disruption? What is the significance of dance and theater and disrupting conversation and discourse and refocusing it? And how important is that for the Ailey Company?
I think it's extremely important because I think any organization, institution, or what have you, that loses its core value system, I think ultimately loses its way. Mm-hmm. And Alvin Ailey founded the company in a time of discord to say something beautiful ultimately about his people. But in a way that was a huge disruption, right? Mm-hmm. And so, sorry for all the dinging. So I think it's important because it is a part of the bloodline of the company, to not just be seen, but to be heard in all ways. And I think the arts have the opportunity, especially dance, in its sort of abstract way, to say something hard, but still be heard, because it's up to your interpretation, you know. But by the time that you're sort of in it, right? Mm-hmm. And you realize what's going on, it's kind of like taking you on this ride. Mm-hmm. Whereas sometimes in the verbal context, that it kind of can stop people because, well, I don't agree with that, or whatever. It's not about that. It's a way of kind of, I had a great phrase that I've completely forgotten, but it was really good. And, but it's, the ambiguity of it is in a way the beauty of it. Right? So I'm saying a couple of different things. I'm saying that, one, I think it's important because, you know, there was a time, of course, more so before than now, that people would make their voices heard by going into the streets, you know. Now so many people are just sort of on social media having their moment, but they don't understand that that's not the same as a vote, right? And so my dancers feel, they see what's going on. They want to be a part of it, but they're so busy they don't have time to do a lot of different things that people are doing. But they want to say something. And we're not a political organization, but we dance works that are political. And so this gives them a voice too. So I don't want to forget that in some of my thinking, it's not just about the audience, but it's about my dancers having a way to be a part of the discussion with the work that they do, knowing that it will make all of the work that they do better as communicators.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that it's lost often on audiences, the extent to which dancers have to dig into the content of what it is that they are performing, which also it feeds them. And Donald, one of the things I read that you said about working with the Ailey company on this piece is that you fell in love with the company all over again. And part of that, I think, is because of the way in which you describe the dancers giving all of themselves to this content. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process and engaging with them in that way?
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge when you go in, when a choreographer walks into a room with a group of dancers that they do not normally work with.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of natural skepticism because, and some of it, I mean, it's completely understandable. I understand it. I mean, I've been around long enough to know that it ain't just about me, you know, that they are skeptical because in order to do the work, they have to work real hard. It's literally, it's certainly sweat and tears, and often there is blood involved too in order to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so they know that. They go, okay, if I'm going to go on this journey, it needs to be worthwhile for me on some level. I think that's kind of the subtext of how I read the room these days. And so that certainly was a little bit of that with the Ailey company, even though, I mean, but I also had a history and a relationship with the Ailey company. So they were much more generous and much more forgiving at first they weren't so like hanging back, but that way they were just, you know, they were perched a little bit. And so that's what to say.
I love the use of the word perched. That's perfect for dancers. Right? I get that sense of,
Let's see what you got to say. And blah, blah, blah. But then once I told them what it was that I was wanting to do, what I wanted to explore with the piece, they were really engaged. It was quite remarkable to me. And I said to either Ronnie Favors or somebody at one point during the process, well, should I do blah, 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 blah? She said, no, they are really interested. They want to know. Nice. The more information you can give them, they are really happy about that because they really want to know. So there was this inquisitiveness on the part of the dancers that felt welcoming. And also I felt like there was a certain amount of respect that they had for me, or there was respect for me to allow me to do my process. And that they were not sitting back and judging the process. Even if they didn't understand it sometimes, they go, okay, you know, go down. You know.
In 2019, you were undisputed as, you know, a seasoned elder. I mean, a lot of things happened.
You know, that's really lovely, and I know it's always meant as a compliment and stuff, but that elder thing kind of unnerves me.
Seasoned-wise elder that you are.
All right. So, the experience with the Ailey dancers was really remarkable. I mean, you know, for a group of dancers who, I mean, usually to get to the place where I was with them, like midway through the first week, it usually takes 2 weeks in other companies to get to that point, or maybe a little bit longer. And it's because they were very open-armed with it, you know, and joined us. And some of them I knew.
Yeah.
from back in the day, or either through
right.
I knew in New York.
Our beloved Jeroboam is in that company.
That's right, Jeroboam, who danced at Spectrum.
Yeah.
Jeroboam.
Well, I mean, just to piggyback on that, I mean, it's always great for me because, especially with somebody like Donald Byrd, who has the ability, he has a kind of way of seeing the dancer, and not just seeing their potential, because that sounds a little rote, but knowing exactly what to say that brings something out in a particular dancer that I hadn't seen. And I'll go like,
wow.
Oh, there was a new dancer, Patrick, Patrick, we just go say Patrick.
Patrick, you know who you are.
Yeah,
you know who you
are, Patrick. We love you, Patrick.
I remember him saying, "You're too polite, you're too polite." And he is. He's extremely polite, which I love. Don't change, Patrick. Yeah. But he brought out an authenticity, and that I noticed behind that likability and all of that is somebody who's really got a lot of grit, but he had to be invited to say, that's okay.
Right.
Don't disrespect to do it. What do you have to say? How do you do that? Anyway, things like that just made me see something beyond what I already knew about the dancers. So this kind of relationship not only informs the dancers, but it informs the artistic director if you're paying attention.
Yeah. I think the thing with them, like individually, I was just like, so like, ooh. I mean, and I have to say, I learned some things from Judy about that. Judy Jamison was the biggest cheerleader for that company I had ever seen. I'd never seen, and she just loved the dancers. She just kind of go off into some ecstasy from watching them dance. And so part of what happened when I was there, I started to understand that, in a way that I had not before. So I was in love with those people. I mean, somebody got so they got to have a solo, so you can, so that became part of the structure of the piece, but they were just beautiful. They're just absolutely beautiful. And, I mean, they were all unique. They are all unique, each one of them. I mean, they work well as an ensemble, but they are really unique dancers, each and every one, and bring a different color to the palette, and it was remarkable to work with them. I mean, piggybacking on the Patrick thing, is like Patrick was just so willing.
Yeah.
So it made it easy to say things to him. Patrick, that was really nice, but can you do blah blah? Or even somebody like Samantha, the facility that's so easy. It's like butter. It's like no effort, no nothing. And like, can you give it a little bit more punch? And so it was those kinds of things. And then I think also with people like Jackie, one is Jacqueline, one is Jackie
Green.
I'd known Jackie Green since she had been in the second company when she danced Shards. And first of all, I didn't recognize her when I came in because she'd grown up, But that idea of saying something to her, I found during the process that sometimes people would be dancing. I said, do this, and then I would just go over and kind of say to her, if you do a little bit more of this, if you just like that, kind of almost like whispering in her ear, and she would kind of nod, and then she would do it. And there were some things that she was having difficulty doing. I said, why don't you go in the other room and kind of explore this with it? And when she came back, it was that last solo that she does in the piece, and that it was like a part of her I had not seen before. I think many people were surprised by her, by her performance.
That's beautiful. Thank you for giving us a little bit of the inside of what it's like to work with dancers, because as an audience member, we sit down and we see it cooked. Essentially. So it's really good to have a better understanding of what happens behind the scenes. Thinking about the future, there are a couple of things happening, and I'm curious about where this piece and the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater might be as these conversations and these public gatherings or celebrations or recognitions happen. One is the Greenwood Initiative that's going to celebrate the centennial of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma in May of 2021. And then the other is the Greenwood Initiative, which is a Mike Bloomberg initiative and was one of the things that he mounted his campaign on. I just happened to have received this in the mail, and I thought it was really interesting because two of the things that this initiative proposes is to create generational wealth for Black Americans through home ownership, and then to create 100,000 new Black-owned businesses, doubling their number. And those are the two things that Greenwood stripped that community of, was their homes and their livelihoods.
The massacre stripped.
I'm sorry?
Massacre stripped Greenwood.
Yeah. Right, and thank you for saying massacre too, because one of the things that the Centennial Committee has on their logo is the Greenwood riot, and that's crossed out and it says massacre. Yeah. Because we've talked a lot about not naming domestic violence, and when we do name domestic violence, we overlook the fact that somewhere between 35 and 300 people were killed in Greenwood, and that the entire town was obliterated. But the question I have is, where do you all see this piece or the Ailey Company and Donald Byrd in these conversations going forward?
Well, I do know that Sylvie Waters from the Ailey organization, the founding director of Alvin Ailey 2, the second company, I was supposed to be there, I think this week, in Greenwood for a banquet or a gathering of some sort to celebrate something that was, I think, that maybe the kickoff in some ways for the event next year. And obviously we can't be there, and it didn't happen. And so I think my plan is, and I think it's also Christopher Zunger's plan, is to keep, who is the PR person at Ailey, is to kind of keep this in front, this piece and the Ailey Company and in front of anything that has to do with Greenwood, like to have it, try to ensure that it is there.
Right.
It is, because it's really, I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, I think in some ways it's brought more awareness to a certain group of people about what happened in Greenwood than did the TV show. Because the TV show is kind of used as a way of kind of as a setup. And I think in this is so much focus, and people that see it certainly ask questions about it and about Greenwood and want to know more. So I think it is, in some ways, in a strange kind of way, one could think of this as being a piece to the 100th, the centenary of the Greenwood massacre, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Great. So, we've had this whole conversation, and we've not gotten political necessarily, but I do want to, before we end the call, get your responses, both of you, because Robert, in December, I think it was, or February, you were at the Kennedy Center and made a comment about, it was February, made a comment about being able to lean into the mic, which was a little bit of shade being thrown at the impeachment hearings. And I'm just curious about both of your responses to this whole mindset around the arts not being worthy of support in a time like these that we are experiencing right now, and the whole debate around funding of the Kennedy Center and that being diminished as nonsense, essentially.
Yeah. You want to start?
I mean, just quick, come on.
Yeah, I think as you say, it's nonsense. And, Vivian, you and I had a conversation about this grant that I put into the Roddenberry Foundation, and that and that the essence of the grant and the problem I said that I want to solve, the problem I want to solve is the problem of the arts not being considered a credible partner in all of the issues, and a credible partner in the solutions.
Specific issues.
Yeah, for almost everything, for civic and social issues, for all, for all kinds of things. But people don't think of the arts that way. They think of them as being, oh, that's nice, but not necessary. Right. And I assert that that what we do in the arts and in dance is in fact necessary. And I want to go back to something Robert said before about the power of dance. Power of dance actually comes from its ability to communicate kinesthetically. And what the kinesthetic response is that you don't have any control over how you're responding to what's happening. And so it's already entered, and you are already going with whatever it is before you realize that something has happened, as opposed to with verbal, as Robert said, that the doors close and the locks go into place. As soon as people hear something they don't want to hear. And so they miss the rest of what's being said. And with dance, and I think even in imagistic, what's the word? The theater of the image, that is really difficult to actually close the door. By the time you close the door, you've locked it inside already with you. So the thing is that it's nonsense for people to say that the arts are, are not necessary, and also with the Kennedy Center, that's kind of our national theater
treasure
and our national arts center. And so that just says, and it is a repository in many ways, an ongoing repository of American culture. So it's a whole part of American culture that they are wanting to disappear.
Yeah. Robert, you have anything to add?
I knew he would say it better than I would, but yeah, I think it's nonsense. And I think also people don't understand how the arts, it's probably in everything that they do. Yeah. They don't even know it. In the hat that they put on, and the song that they hum, it is a part of us all. And even when we don't even recognize how important it is. I mean, right now we're doing something called Ailey All Access, where, of course, accessible was a word that was used against the Ailey company. And now the whole notion of accessibility ain't so light anymore.
Right.
And so offering classes online and people really responding to needing to move, needing to be moved and inspired to the notion that we will get through this. So it's sort of making us understand the importance of what we do and how people lean on it for spiritual inspiration. Because yes, the physical is very important right now, that we stay healthy, but the spiritual part is extremely important to stay healthy in a way. And so what we're able to give people is like a balm, right? It's something that's kind of intangible in a way even. It is like a virtual shelter. I think that's what this company has always been able to offer people. And it's extremely important that we celebrate our common humanity in all ways.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to what Robert just said. It's like all of the arts, so the Ailey organization has very particular ways that they go about doing things. Each arts organization has their own unique and particular way of doing it.
Yeah.
Combine them all together and you have the possibility for profound experiences to happen. And so the thing is that you want to keep all of those different perspectives and points of view healthy, and value them, because collectively it is something that's remarkable.
Well, I have certainly valued this bit of time that you all have given to talk about all of these issues and to talk about this new piece. Again, I am confident that eventually we are going to see the Ailey Company in Seattle. We cannot wait for that to happen. I hope that everybody there at the company as well, please give our love to everyone because we look forward to embracing them. It's the thing we love to do, but we didn't get a chance to, so please give them our love. And I just want to be sure to mention that for anyone who wants into Ailey All Access, that you should go to alvinailey.org and sign up for the newsletter. You'll get a notice for whenever a new piece is posted online, and that I have thoroughly enjoyed. And you should also be keeping up with the work of Donald Byrd and Spectrum Dance. And I know that you are going to be uploading some conversation and some works that you've done at spectrumdance.org. So folks should go there too and stay involved, stay in touch with whenever the Ailey Company has been rescheduled to return to the Paramount Theater. Go to stgpresents.org and sign up for their newsletter so you can stay on top of that. I love you all so very much. I miss you, Robert. We miss the Ailey Company. I get to see Donald much more frequently because we reside in the same city. But I just want to say thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you. You too, both of you.